Good morning. I'm glad to see you. I thought of changing the formula that we have. I see you have signed in. What I want you to do is we can start using the raising your hand if you want to ask a question or to reply to one of the responses I've made. I think that will add a bit more to the class, and I think we are now at ease with working on teams. Today, I'm going to speak about the ethical clearance. Please switch off your video and mute your microphone. Write your student number in the chat. If you have any queries, please send them to ctintat@unisa.ac.za, or you can send it directly to me, italiam@unisa.ac.za. If you have a query from the library, and they really are very helpful, you can send it to ctinlib@unisa.ac.za. Please complete the feedback form, and remember the session will be recorded. I want to remind you of things that we discussed during the week. We had a meeting on Wednesday night in which they promoted the OER, and that is that is a MOOC, and you can go there on MOOC and then it will open up to UNISA, the UNISA MOOC, and then they spoke about, the librarian spoke as well. What I want to tell you is that on the MOOC, there is now a MOOC specially for academic writing. And one of the people in the group had done that MOOC. And I checked it last night, and they say it will take you about 3 weeks to do it. Now, I know everybody's very busy and they don't really have 3 weeks, but I think it will be worth your while at least to have a look at it. And then the quantitative support was done by Lissy Boy. And those of you who are considering doing a questionnaire should really consult with Lizzie before the time, because it's no good telling them that you only that you are going to do a questionnaire. You need to tell which theoretical model you are going to use in the questionnaire. And if you are going to use a psychometric test, you need to say where you got the permission to use the questionnaire. On the Thursday forum, that was about Lizzie's research, and I would really want you to go and listen to the session if you couldn't attend it, because she explained exactly what the information that you will need for your data analysis. If you are still working on your research proposal, you have to contact her, because she will be able to help you with the correct wording for your data analysis. Then yesterday, I attended the workshops from Pretoria, and you can write to this email address mandrw@unisa.ac.za. Then they add you to their teams. It seems as if most of their workshops are between 10 and 12. Now, I know many of you are working, but maybe you can organize that you have your lunch at a different time and then use the data from work if you have a problem with data at home. It was very frustrating for me because the professor spoke about how to create a virtual library or a folder system, but her slides weren't visible. And many of the other students complained about it as well. But I assume that on the recording, you will be able to see the slides, because she spoke about the program Mandely that apparently you can use to populate with the articles that and books that you are using, and then the program will do the referencing for you. So many of you are getting bad feedback on the on your referencing, but I think it will be worth your while to join this group as well, even if it's only for this specific program. I asked Richard to listen to the session as well, so that when they develop the OER aimed at the postgrad students, they can incorporate that. Then she said two more things that I want to bring to your attention again. The university does not want you to communicate on your private email. That's why you have a My Life email. So when you communicate with them, because many of you tell me that your supervisor isn't responding, they most probably do not get the emails from a Gmail account. They can control the security from your My Life account, but they cannot control the security on other private accounts. So you can't communicate with the university unless you use your My Life account. And then when you communicate with the university, put your topic, what you need, as well as your student number in this subject line. And I'm going to insist on that as well, because I'm worried when I get work to read from a Gmail account, I have no proof that you are a UNISA student based on a Gmail account. So please keep those things into consideration. Today, we need to speak about the ethical clearance. I quickly need to check whether there are any questions. No questions up till now. Good morning, Gail. As we are moving through the classes, of course, I'm thinking about what will I do the same and what will I do differently. And I will move the ethical clearance earlier into the conversation that I have with students, because I thought the ethical clearance is more or less a letter to the university. My master's was a dissertation only, so it was obvious you have permission to read the articles, but this is different. The ethical clearance, first of all, is done by the university to protect themselves. In the past 6 months, the two elite universities in the country, Stellenbosch and UCT, they are in the top 200 or 300 universities in the world, and UCT is rated as the best university in Africa. Both those universities approved research, and when the research was published, there was an outcry about the unethical behavior and the unethical findings. In the case of Stellenbosch University, it was sports science students who came to the conclusion that colored women have a drinking problem and they're overweight. I mean, you can't. I don't have, but when I read the research, I knew these people would get into serious trouble because it's absolute junk they've written, and the research methodology must have been unethical. And then at UCT, they came to the conclusion that they do not have enough Black students doing biological sciences because the Black students are more materialistic. Again, the researcher is a senior researcher. My daughter worked with her on AIDS projects, so she had published in very good journals. But her methodology, again, it was pulled apart. She went into one of the cafeterias on campus and set out questionnaires, and then she based her article on that. So first of all, the university should protect itself against any research like that. And then the results of unethical research cannot be published or applied. Nobody is going back to the medical research done during the Holocaust on innocent children and whatever else they found out. You can't use that. And then the next thing is, if one's only doing an honors and a master's, I'm very proud that I could complete my master's, but you still are inexperienced, and it's also for your own protection. Now, what is the nature of the ethical clearance? First of all, you need to show that you have respect for people. And that means that whoever takes part in your research must be able to choose whether they want to take part. And that really makes it quite difficult. And then if you do research with minors, I know there are education students here. If you do research with minors or those who are doing psychology and health sciences, if you work with people with diminished abilities, they must be protected. So if you're going to do research about something like dementia, care for dementia patients, and you are going to have questionnaires, etc., you must really work very carefully with that. Then They speak about the principle of beneficence, and it's quite interesting. Because in our country that it is the same, that the medical research is done at the big hospitals like Grooteskier and Tygerberg and so on, where you have mostly poor and working class people. But who benefits from medical research? Usually middle class people with a medical aid. So maximum benefit and minimum harm. And it's not only physical harm, they speak about emotional distress, discomfort, economic and social disadvantage. And then this one, the justice. Those who bear the burden of the research should also benefit from the research. And what I feel strongly about is the occupational therapists also do their training in the public sector, but very few people without a medical aid can afford to send their children for occupational therapy. The same with physiotherapy, with the psychologist and everyone. So think about those aspects carefully when you do your research. The requirements for the ethical clearance. And every step of the research will be examined. So when you do even your literary reviews are going to be questioned in your ethical clearance. That's why you need to work from peer-reviewed articles. And if you consult a book, it's important that that book has standing in your discipline. So everything will be examined in this ethical clearance report. Okay, the sections of the UNISA ethical clearance has about 6 sections. I posted the documents, the ethical clearance documents, I posted it to the files tab in this streams. On top of the chat, you have files, and I posted it there, and I marked it ethical clearance. And even wherever you are now with your research, it would be a good idea to read through it so that you can start preparing yourself. And the first section is about the researcher's details. And in that case, look at what I want to know from you. The experience relevant to the proposed research. Now, if you're an honors or a master's student, if you're a master's student, at least you can mention whatever your projects in your honors year. You can always, if you have done some kind of research at work, those projects can be mentioned. Then Jacques said that even these workshops that you attend with me or with UNISA head office, those can be mentioned as well. And the qualifications relevant to the proposed research. Now, you may have a problem like I had. I majored in English, but I did my master's in linguistics. So you need to convince them that your that you have what you there want is recognition of prior learning. And luckily, I could convince them that I have done enough work, and I was often in charge of the a curriculum and subject planning for students. So I had to have some analytical skills, and that's why they allowed me to do a master's. But if you are now doing a degree in which you haven't majored, you have to be able to explain to them what is the link between what you have studied and what you are doing now. How did you get the cognitive skills necessary for this? And then, if you have attended courses relevant to that, so for instance, you have done interview skills at work, and now you are going to use interviews in your research, that would be applicable. I have done several MOOCs, and the MOOCs are available from universities all over the world. I've done 2 American and 1 from Delft University. Now I don't have time to do them anymore. But if you can find a MOOC related to one of your subjects and you still have time for that as well, attend it, because you are entitled. They give you a certificate of completion if you complete it. And it's often, I did one on economy when I started running my own budget, and it is pleasant to see other people's remarks on what you have done. Then publications and other research outputs. Now, it's very seldom that somebody doing an honors has published in a respected academic journal. But if you have written for your trade magazines, or you've done something for the in-house magazine, you can mention that to show that you have at least the skills to write up your research report. And this kind of CV that you have to attend, that you can't develop the day that you have to apply for ethical clearance. That must be part of how you approach your research. I want to go back and ask you if you have any. There's something with my computer today. Okay. Any queries, people? Because I've spoken a lot up till now. Okay. Oh, you asked me what is a MOOC. Universities nowadays get a kind of credit for a service to the community. That's why I only know, but even here, I know that before COVID, one of the computer labs were open to disadvantaged children to improve their computer literacy on a Saturday. They were doing some kind of programming with them. Now, the universities often want to start a new module, and then they present it online. I've done one in psychology at Berkeley, and I think we were something like more than 1,000 students doing it. And so they kind of do a practice run on this module as part of their community service. And it's usually free, but you can get credits for it. So if I ever wanted to study at Berkeley, which I won't, but then I would have been able to use that as a credit. And I have to do, I'm busy with, oh yes, I was involved with the OER on how to use Word, and then I need to complete an OER, MOOC on training, which I'm working on at the moment, but it doesn't cost me anything. So if you go and look for MOOCs, there are many available, more or less in every discipline possible. And as I say, it is from all the universities, which makes it quite fun to do. Now, in section 1, they look at your methodology, and that's why it's so important that you contact Lizzie and have a discussion with her about the questionnaires. And because she can give you advice on how to design a questionnaire and how to have external and internal validity. And it's interesting, I think it's in the next one. Oh, that's the risk assessment. I'm scared I'm not going to but I want to go back to this one, because somewhere you even have to indicate how long the interview will be, where it will take place. And remember, I spoke about, are you going to make a recording? Are you going to make notes, etc., etc.? All those things must be in your methodology. You must be able to answer those questions. Then with the risk assessment, they give you a kind of form to fill in, and you have to tick whether there's going to be risk. And when Jacques sent me his, what I found interesting, he said that because he's going to have group interviews, if you speak to a group, you are never ever prepared for those unexpected questions. So if you are going to discuss an issue in a group as part of your research, you have to prove that you have the skills to think on your feet. And I think those of you who are used to working with groups, you will know that in every group discussion, something jumps out that you didn't expect. And how are you going to cope with the relationships in the group? How are you going to keep them focused? It's easier from, can you see properly? Just give me an indication. Can you see properly? Because sometimes I've now attended quite a few of these classes over the last week, and sometimes I can't see properly, but you would have complained if you wanted to.
It's all good, Mimi. I can see everything.
Okay, thanks. I hope she spoke on behalf of everybody. So by ticking the boxes, you can see whether you are, there will be no risk to very high risk. And that's again why you should actually download the ethical clearance and start making notes on it, because you may think that you are low risk, and then there might be one or two that will put you in a high risk. And it's better to be prepared than to start filling in the form, because you now really need, you have about a week to get your ethical clearance. And now all of a sudden you have to start answering these questions. And then how is it decided? What kind of participants are you expecting? And then you have to tick all these. They have a little yes, no box, and you have to tick what you are going to do. And I think much research should be done on how to help people with disabilities. I have a friend who's a quadriplegic after after an accident. And those people do not have an easy life. So the research must be done, but they must still be treated with respect. So go through this list and see which of these apply to you. In South Africa, persons whose native language differs from the language used for the research. My daughter used to work for NIDS at UCT, and they do lots of research for the government on how people spend their money, how do you define being poor, etc. And they go into these rural districts, and their field workers need to be first language speakers wherever they do the interviews. When my daughter had to go out and check on the quality of the field work being done, she had to take an interpreter with her. So please go through this list. I don't know whether I have any of these at the bottom in my classes. I think once somebody asked me that I thought it might be environment, he might be interested in environment. But check whether you are going to work with people in your participants. What exactly, who will they be? And then what activities are you doing with them? Again, I believe, and I'm serious about that much research should be done in prisons, because we need to rehabilitate those people. Many of them are anyway there because they're poor. You very seldom find a rich person in jail because they can afford better attorneys. So research should be done. But again, what activities are you going to use there? And if you are going to observe illegal activities, how are you going to do it? It's again, research should be done. But how are you going to do it ethically? Again, go through this list of activities. For instance, if you collect physical data from participants such as body measurement, blood samples, etc. One of the things I know NIDS did, they took people's blood pressure, weight, and they measured their height, because they need, that was also part of the health aspect of poor people. And again, how are you going to do that so that it's still safe for you, and you respect the dignity of the person you're working with. It's the same with teaching and social work. It's very important then, what activity are you going to observe or measure? And then I thought, how is it decided? External influences. When I worked at Stellenbosch, one of my colleagues was an honors student who wanted permission to do her master's, but I don't know how it happened. She did her research and then she applied for the ethical clearance. Now, she had to, her research was, what do the engineering students, how do they experience the simultaneous interpretation done at the faculty? And she asked them to fill in the forms during the lunch break. And as a kind of measure of goodwill, she gave them sweets. And they didn't give her clearance because she reimbursed the participants. I think it was just part of a power play between that specific committee and the humanities. But if there are money involved, be careful. And then if you have an external, if you are sponsored by, even by an NGO, again, if you're not paying for your own masters and you do it as a grant, whatever, please make sure that you know how you are going to answer questions about your grant or sponsorship. You can imagine, you can see now with the coronavirus where they are doing, they need the university laboratories for research. So researchers are sponsored. But the problem is that if, let's say, what's one of the big companies making Aspen or one of those sponsor your research, are you really going to find that their product doesn't work? So if you get any help, any financial help, you need to be able to say why the fact that somebody is paying you, why that doesn't influence the outcome of your research. Then you have to be able to say, I have classified myself as a medium risk, I'm not a high risk, and you need to be able to motivate that answer. And in medium and high risk, you need to be able to say why it's so important for the research to be done and who is going to benefit by the knowledge you are gathering. And in medium and high risk, how are you going to mitigate the risk? What are you going to do? And think carefully. At the moment, the word mitigation is often on the news because they keep on speaking, how are we going to mitigate the risk of contracting COVID? And then it's wash your hands, social distancing, and the mask. So what if you are in the high risk? You are working with dementia patients. How are you going to minimize the risk to them. You are working with a small business financial statements. How are you going to make sure the information that you get from them will be confidential? In teaching, most parents do not understand the results of psychometric tests. They don't understand IQ tests. They don't understand EQ, the whole lot. So what are you going to do to still treat the information with respect? Then, if you're going to involve communities or members of organizations, and you will see that often there's a big hoo-ha about where you interview high-risk groups. For instance, in Cape Town, there is an NGO that look after the interests of sex workers. Now, whenever there's any research done on them, the burger feels strongly it should be in the newspaper. So how are you going to still have the dignity, confidentiality of that research, if that's the kind of research that the newspapers will most probably sensationalize? And if a community has asked you to do research, do you remember in the Eastern Cape, they wanted to start mining the sand, and they would have built a road between the settlement and the place where the cattle can graze. And research was done to prove that the damage to the environment will be such that the benefit of mining the sand wouldn't have been worth it. Now, I agreed with the decision not to build the road. But that's because I think mines should not in my backyard. It's a totally personal decision. I have no scientific backing for why I don't like the road. But can you see that if the community had asked an environmental economist to do the research, that economist really will have to prove for ethical clearance that he is not biased because the community asked him to do the research. And that is for all of these groups that I mentioned here. And then don't jump around until you find a university that will give you ethical clearance. So if you have tried to do it at another university and you have been disqualified, you have to say why. Your proposal, and that's why I say that even while you are doing your, look here, you have to have a page in which you give an introduction, a motivation, and your literature review. So even while you're doing your literature review, even though it's not part of your literature review, you have to look at it with this in mind. How am I going to motivate this literature review when I do my ethical clearance. I keep on speaking and I don't know whether I have questions. Any questions? Okay. It is an enormously long, a very, I really didn't know that you have to answer so many questions for the ethical clearance. Usually I make about 12 slides for a class. For this one, I think I made 18 or 19 at least. Okay, if you look at, so your literature review, then you have your research questions and the aims and objectives. Then you need to go with your research paradigm, quantitative or qualitative, or are you going to do a mixed research? From what I've discussed with Jacques and from what Lizzie said on Thursday night, I think that the majority of you are going to end up with mixed research. I can only give you advice on qualitative, not on quantitative. Sorry, I'm going. Then I'm now reminding myself, on Thursday, Lizzie is busy with 2 masters at the same time. She's doing one at UNISA and then at another institution, I can't remember. That's one of the reasons why I started these Thursday forums, because that will add quite weight to your ethical clearance. If you say, but at the discussion forum, I presented this part of my research. I have a colleague who speaks she's very well spoken. And I'm going to ask her to present in August. But then for the rest of the year and next year, I would like you to say, I am now ready to present. And if you feel you can't speak for an hour, what would be ideal if we then can have 2 students presenting, and people can ask you, where did you find this? What do you think of that? Because that will give you an opportunity to have your research evaluated, and I'm sure that will improve your CV with the ethical clearance. Then your research design and the approach, and look at what they want from you, from the participants, the name of the group, your site population. If you're doing research about the people in your company, what is the site population? How did you decide on the what will then be the sample size and the age of the sample size? Remember, if we're working with minors, their parents need to have signed, or their guardians need to have signed permission. And for Pete's sake, if you work with children in a group, it's very likely you are going to have children with separated or divorced parents. And if both of them have to sign, both of them have to sign. What method did you use to make a sample? Your sample size, how are you going to justify it? And then how much will the participant spend, time will he spend? And if you've decided to exclude people, you can't exclude somebody in your office merely because they always mess tea on your table. You have to have quite a valid reason. And then if you include people, what were the criteria? And I remember that was one question that I asked Jacques when he presented at the forum. And remember how quickly he answered it. So even now, more than, well, his ethical clearance was done in 2015. So 5 years after the event, he remembered why he excluded some people. So these criteria need to be well thought out. How did you recruit your participants? I have a nurse from KwaZulu-Natal sending her papers to me for the critical reading. And she is doing research on how the attitude of the nurses influence patients, whether they come back to the clinic and whether they keep using the medicine, whether they apply the advice from the clinic. And she is recruiting at the taxi rank closest to the clinic. And she's going to ask random people coming from the clinic whether they'll go back, what kind of experience they had, etc. But can you see that this is looking for problems? That way that she is recruiting, I think she will have to think about it again. Then you have to be very serious about when and how the data will be collected. Then when you have section 5 is about data collection and data analysis methods. Remember the abstracts I've shared with you, they all speak about something T and P and whatever. And in your methodology, when you do the data analysis method and you checked it with Lizzie, ask her about the requirements for your ethical clearance. Then you are going to collect data which must be confidential. Then you are going to ask a statistician to help you to analyze this. And you need to provide the details of that statistician. And then if you do a quantitative study, it is the internal and external validity and the validity and reliability of the data. So how, if you, in your research design, how did you make sure there was internal and external validity? And then where you have a data gathering instrument, does it measure what it should measure? If you use IQ tests, does that test really measure what it should measure? And that I saw in, it's all as a medical social worker. She works with the, yes, whatever a medical social worker does. And in her research proposal, she actually worked carefully with the instrument because many of these psychometric tests are imported from America. So they're not always valid in South Africa. And in her research proposal, she carefully explained which part of her instrument she's not going to use because it wouldn't have been valid in that case of the patient that she needed to test. And then, if the reliability, if another social worker use this test, will another social worker find the same results? And here are the requirements for a qualitative study: credibility, dependability, conformability, transferability, authenticity. You have to have a look at your data analysis method, and all these things need to be ticked in the yes block. So when you describe your data analysis methods and you are doing qualitative design, these 5 words must be in that paragraph. They are going to look for it. Any questions? Oh, Gail, okay, Gail, you are. Only problem now is the permission letter from my Department of Health. I have an upcoming meeting with my supervisors on the way forward. Due to COVID-19, we are really at a crossroad on whether I will be allowed to collect data at the health department. Do you have any suggestions? I have been trying to contact the health department without any reply as yet. Gail, unmute yourself, please. This is one serious problem. Who is the head of the health department in the Western Cape? Gail, do you know? Because this is now, it is really a serious matter, because you'll need to find a person who can help you. What on earth? I know Debbie Schaefer is with education. Well, that's where I would start, to try and get to what on earth do they call, it's not the, is it the Minister of Health in the Western Cape Parliament? But this is a serious problem. So what I would do is I would go the political route and see if I can't get hold of the political head and tell him about the importance of your research. And then Dr. Keith Klutter is head. Can't you write to his office? You can unmute yourself if it will make it easier for you to have a discussion. Because it must be, if I were you, I think I'd write to his office and ask him his help. Okay, no, that's fine. She says her laptop's microphone is faulty. So I would go that route and maybe even try your local councillor if he can't give you a name of somebody to contact. And then, of course, I'm having I have a chronic disease, and I'm seeing the specialist on Monday, and I phoned her and I said, we can do it on Zoom or Teams, but I'm not going to sit in any waiting room at the moment. So it will be dangerous merely to collect the information. But Gail, try and get the name of a person on that side. And then your ethical considerations, description of the process of obtaining informed consent. That, remember I spoke about the children of divorced or separated parents. How did you make sure that not both parents should have signed? What measures are you taking to protect the confidentiality of the information? And how are you going to store the data, and how are you going to dispose of the data? In Jacques' case, he even had to, because I think his data must be destroyed this year. He even had to explain how he's going to destroy the electronic data or dispose of the electronic data. What are the benefits of the study? Remember, there was a question on a Wednesday or Thursdays where the student wanted to know what about the keywords, and my answer was, who is going to buy the knowledge that you are going to add to the body of knowledge? And who will benefit by the study? You go again, description of the risks of the procedures which the participants may or will suffer, as well as the level of risk. If they have to, I'm going to use a very stupid one, they're going to fill in a questionnaire, and the pencil may drop, and then they may bump their head as they pick up the pencil. But it's highly unlikely all those things will happen. So sometimes there is a risk, but it's a very low level of risk. But if you are going to look at the movements of chefs while they are cutting meat, it's not such a low level of risk that they will nick their thumb, and you can't work with meat if you have blood on your hand. You are looking for a serious infection. So sometimes the risk is very low. How are you going to get the chef to work as quickly as possible, because that's the movement that you want to see, and how are you going to mitigate the risk? If you have a community, how are they going to participate in this study? Descriptions of possible adverse effects on the community, and how are you going to mitigate the anticipated risk? There's a lot of research done about customary law and the human rights of women. Now, in a small community, everybody, even if you try and keep the information confidential, people know things. I can tell you in my complex exactly who drinks too much. People know things. I don't know their names, but I know the number of their house. People in small communities know things. Now you have done research in some other rural area, and it comes to mind that the head of the community does not treat people with respect, and especially not women. Your study is picked up by a newspaper or by a magazine. What's going to happen to that poor, or those poor women who spoke to you? Or you look at a small business and you find something adverse about it. What's going to happen to that small business? And you have to have a checklist to ensure that the participant information sheet and consent form meet ethical requirements. So even the consent form will have to meet ethical requirements. Again, if you work with a vulnerable group, if you work with minors, read the consent form carefully. And that, I think, is that. Are there any questions about, oh, here Gail said, I will send out my questionnaires electronically as well as suggest doing my interviews via Teams. I just want confirmation on whether the health employees will have the time. Gail, I think that might be a good idea, because you can quite easily record a discussion on Teams. So that, and of course, I can sit here and cough all I want and I can't infect you. So I think your idea to use it electronically is a very good idea. Of course, on Teams, it is a problem. I can't see your body language, whether you understand, whether you are bored, whether I have more questions. So you will have to say what you are going to do. I have a question. If you are doing qualitative, do the interviews have to be face-to-face, or can you do them via Skype, Zoom, Teams? I can't see, under the current circumstances, why it would be a problem. I think where you might have a problem, but discuss it with your supervisor, is when you have to work with people who are not at ease with speaking on Teams or Zoom. I use Teams for my work and then Zoom for social and other activities. And what I've found, I do gym on Zoom, and then I have a Bible study group on Zoom. Now, in the Bible study group, I love them, and I've belonged to that group for more than 20 years. I think it's now 26 or 25 years I've been with that group, so I know them very well. But because I'm still working and very busy, I'm not one of the leaders in the group. I do my bit, and that's what I do. I have too much other work to do. And now, because I'm at ease with Teams and Zoom, I have moved up in the pecking order in the Bible study. Do you understand? So, Ms. Whitehead, I think that you will have to explain how you are going to work with people who may not be at ease with the Teams or Zoom. The problem is I'm using UNISA students who are located all over the world. Yes, you could no. Then you don't have a choice. You'll have to have Skype, Zoom, or Teams interviews. There are also quite a few that, but yeah, I don't know whether they have recording facilities. But anyway, there are many. In your case, I can't see what else you could have done, but I would take into account how at ease the person is with electronic, with e-communication. And then you remember how I struggled in the beginning. Andres used to send me notes on what I can do to solve all my problems on this side. So I think you need, and what are you going to do if there is a bad line? Because yesterday, I don't know whether they had load shedding in Pretoria, but there were times when I couldn't really hear the lecturer. And now that's why I want to listen to the recording again. Any other questions? Any other people close to getting your ethical clearance? Some of you I know have started at the beginning of the year, and all the work that you've done up till now, just glance at it and say, when my ethical clearance come, how am I going to cope with this bit and ethical clearance? We've worked very hard this week, and some of you have been at all the lectures. I really appreciate it. And if those of you, if you are ready for your ethical clearance, you must have traveled some time with your studies. If you feel comfortable to present, let me know, because we finished July's presentation, but then the second week in August, that will be the week after the long weekend, I think. If you want to present at that meeting, or you want to co-present with somebody, let me know, and then we start working on those CVs of yours. Any more questions? Ladies and gentlemen, if you had been on a campus university, I would have said, now you can, let's all have coffee in the cafeteria, but go and have a warm drink. I am booked for a hike tomorrow, so I am going to make sure my hiking clothes are ready for tomorrow. Have a nice weekend, and please keep yourself safe. I think it's very dangerous out there. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.